All right, so far in this step, we've selected the controls, we've tailored them to match your system, we've allocated them to different parts of the system or the system overall. Now let's get that documentation completed. No job's done until the paperwork's over. So in this task, we'll document the planned control implementations. So let's jump into it. This is task S4, documentation of planned control implementations. Document the controls for the system and environment of operation in security and privacy plans. Inputs to this task include security categorization, organization and system level risk assessment results, security, privacy, and/or supply chain risks, system element information, system component inventory, business impact or criticality analysis, list of security and privacy requirements allocated to the system, system elements, and the environment of operation, the risk management strategy, the list of selected controls for the system and the environment of operation, and finally, organizational security, privacy, and supply chain risk management policies. Expected outputs for this task are the security and privacy plans for the system. Primary responsibility is the system owner and the common control provider. They are supported by the authorizing official, the authorizing official's designated representative, the information owner or information steward, the system security engineer, the privacy engineer, the system security officer, and the system privacy officer. This does align to the SDLC. For a new system, it aligns with development and acquisition. For an existing system, it aligns with operations and maintenance. It aligns to profile in the cybersecurity framework. So let's jump into this. Security and privacy plans contain an overview of the security and privacy requirements for the system and the controls selected to satisfy requirements. The plans describe the intended application of each selected control in the context of the system with sufficient level of detail to correctly implement the control and subsequently assess the effectiveness of the control. So we have in the last steps, we developed a baseline and we tailored that baseline. That gave us a listing of controls that we either have to implement at the system level or as hybrid controls where part of it is implemented at the system level. So in this step, we're going to describe in documentation in detail how we're going to implement those controls on the system. The control documentation describes how system-specific and hybrid controls are implemented and the plans and expectations regarding the functionality of the system. The description includes planned inputs, expected behavior, and expected outputs where appropriate, typically for those controls implemented in the hardware, software, or firmware components of the system. We're not only going to describe how the control is implemented in the system to provide the protections needed, but we're also going to describe what the inputs and outputs and planned behaviors of that control are. Common controls are also identified in plans. There is no requirement to provide implementation details for the inherited common controls. Rather, those details are provided in the plan for common control providers and are made available to system owners. So a lot of times in our security plan, we can point to the common control provider for further information about those inherited controls. So we just note, hey, this control is being provided by the physical security department. Go check them out. Go ask them about this control. Or if we're really nice, we can include references, hyperlinks, or actually the attachment of the documents in our plan if we want to. For hybrid control, the organization specifies the system level plans and the parts of the control that are provided by the common control provider and the parts of the control that are implemented at the system level. And again, we can look back at when we did the tailoring exercise to look at how these would look in the documentation itself. The organization may develop a consolidated plan that incorporates security and privacy plans or maintain two separate plans, one for security and one for privacy. If you are developing a consolidated plan, the privacy programs collaborate with the security programs to ensure the plan reflects the selection of controls that provide protection with respect to managing the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of PII, and delineates the roles and responsibilities for the control implementation, assessment, and monitoring. For separate system security plans and privacy plans, organizations cross-reference the controls in all plans to help maintain accountability and awareness. The senior agency official for privacy reviews and approves the privacy plan or integrated plan before it's provided to the authorized official or designated representative for review, which is task S6. So we want to make sure the privacy officer has the ability to review things before they go forward. It's a little more work to maintain two separate plans because you have to make sure they stay in synchronization. Documentation of plan control implementation allows for traceability of decisions prior to and after the deployment of the system. To the extent possible, organizations reference existing documentation either by vendors or other organizations that have employed the same or similar system or system elements. They use automated support tools and coordinate across the organization to reduce redundancy and increase efficiency and cost effectiveness of control documentation. So we want to document these things well. We want to provide the traceability. We want to provide the linkage to other systems that use the same or similar controls. The documentation also addresses platform dependencies and includes any additional information necessary to describe how the capability required is achieved at the level of detail sufficient to support the control implementation and assessment. So you want to provide levels of detail that provide the ability for not only the person that's implementing the control to implement it correctly, but also for the assessor to be able to review the control and make sure it was implemented correctly before they actually assess the control. Organizations may document control selection and tailoring information in documents equivalent to the security and privacy plans, for example, in systems engineering or system lifecycle artifacts or documents. Documentation for control implementation follows best practices for hardware and software development and for system security and privacy engineering disciplines, and is consistent with established policies and procedures for documenting activities in the system development lifecycle. So you've got to do it however your organization defines the documentation process. Sometimes it's in the SCTM, like we looked at in the tailoring exercise. Sometimes it's in the security plan in the SSP, and we'll look at that specifically when we get to the part of the course about the SSP, and that's a good place to document it as well. The privacy program supports documentation of privacy risk considerations and the implementations intended to mitigate them. For controls that are mechanism-based, organizations take advantage of the functional specifications provided by or obtained from manufacturers, vendors, and system integrators. So it's important if the vendors we're working with, the manufacturers are working with, provide mechanism-based controls, we need to know about them. We need to get that information from those folks that are building those things for us. This includes any documentation that may assist the organization during the development, implementation, assessment, and monitoring of controls. For certain controls, organizations obtain control implementation information from appropriate organizational entities, like the physical security offices, facilities offices, records management offices, and human resources offices. This is normally done as part of the common control process. Since the enterprise architecture and security and privacy architectures established by the organization guide and inform the organizational approach used to plan for and implement controls, document the process helps to ensure traceability in meeting the security and privacy requirements. So yes, we need to make sure we talk about these things. We understand where we're getting our common controls from. We get the required documentation and implementation information, and make sure that our system follows the architecture established by the enterprise, by security, and by privacy. References for this task include FIPS 199 and 200, Special Publications 818, 30, 53, 64, and 160, Volume 1. They include Special Publications 800, 161, IR 8179, CNSSI 1253, and the Cybersecurity Framework. In this module, we discussed Task S4, It's inputs and outputs, roles and responsibilities, SDLC and CSF lifecycle alignment, plans and requirements, common controls, hybrid controls, consolidated and separate plans, traceability, dependencies, documentation, privacy risk, mechanism-based controls, external implementation details, and references. If any of this doesn't look familiar to you, I suggest you go back and watch the video again and pick up on those points you missed. If it does make sense to you, let's go on to the next video or dive deeper into the course material that follows.